Welcome to Garage 23, and this is our 1990 Nissan Pathfinder. And it handles like a vintage washing machine. So to fix this, we're going to be installing some monotube KYB shocks today. Hopefully that'll fix our ride quality issues, and also we're going to be installing some new wheels and tires, because it's up to this point still felt like someone else's car and it needs a little bit more of my style. And to go along with those wheels and tires, we're going to be lowering it. And I know that's going to get us some hate, but there's a good reason for it. Just hear me out. Here. You said no. See, it's a good reason. My dog's fat. Let's get started. Okay, so we're gonna start in the rear because, well, that's where we got the most work to do. One thing that I've noticed when we're driving this thing around is every time we park somewhere and it's not like perfectly flat, if you pull the e-brake, the car still keeps rolling, and you really have to crank on the e-brake to get it to stop moving. So I'm pretty sure the brake shoes in here are worn out, because I checked to see if there's any adjustment in the handle inside, and it doesn't look like there is. And I checked the cables under here, and it looks like there's a little bit of adjustment in the bracket where the cable splits to both sides, and that looks like it's maxed out. So I think they were trying to compensate for the fact that the brake shoes were worn out. And something else that I noticed was when I tried to order them from AutoZone or O'Reilly's, is that they don't have them listed. And no matter how hard either of them tried looking in their system or whatever, they didn't have anything remotely close to what I needed. So I think that's part of the issue why this hasn't been fixed before, is that whoever had this before probably tried to fix it and then they couldn't get the brake shoes, so they resorted to trying to adjust the e-brake cable. And now we're at the point where they're so worn out that the cable just doesn't really do anything anymore. Like you really have to crank on it, and it does hold, but it will, like if the incline is steep enough, it will still move. So I'm willing to bet that the brake shoes that are in here are pretty worn out, and I'm probably gonna need a hammer. And yep, so you can see there, we have basically nothing left, but luckily it's not down to bare metal, so that's a good sign. The replacements, actually I haven't checked if they're correct, so I hope that they are. They look right because they're a lot smaller than the base model parking brake shoes or brake shoes. These look like they're probably correct. Like I said, the ones that they kept trying to sell me at AutoZone and O'Reilly's were like 2 of these stacked together and about this big. So yeah, that's not gonna fit in here. But it looks like these are the right ones. So another thing you'll notice is that I have the other side ready to go too. Whenever you're doing the parking brake, or actually brake shoes in general, so like any drum brakes, you always wanna keep one side completely untouched, so you can reference to see where all the little springs and all the little junk goes. Because if you take both of them apart and you don't have any reference to how it went back together, you're gonna have a hell of a time trying to fix everything.
Sorry, Doc.
All right, so it looks like we have 2 with these little pins and 2 that don't. So I'm guessing they go paired together like this or something. Yeah, the hub actually has a nice little cutout to make it easier for you to get to the springs and stuff. It's the first time Nissan actually thought about when someone has to work on it. It's awesome. Only this is from the 90s and they don't really do that anymore. Okay. Not like we needed any confirmation, but I still hate drum brakes. That's how it goes back together. I would not recommend this if you're not very mechanically inclined. This is such a pain in the ass and it's very tedious, but that's how it goes back together. And the rotor goes back over this. Yeah, there. So now I just put the rotor or the caliper back on and then repeat the same process, unfortunately, on the other side. Okay, now we're done with the annoying bit. We can move on to the fun stuff. And first up is gonna be suspension. So we are gonna be replacing our blown out electric shocks with some KYBs. And from rummaging around the D21 hard body forums, everybody was recommending the Monomax, but these are mainly for the truck and we weren't able to get them for the front of the Pathfinder because the Pathfinder only has the second trim, which is what we got for the front. It's gonna be the KYB Gas A Just for the front. And these are a 10 or 15% increase in damping, whereas the Monomax is a 40% increase in damping. So that should make our Pathfinder feel nice and planted and improve our handling a bit. So we're gonna put these out in the back. First, we gotta get the old crusty ones out. Now, the easiest bits to get to are down here. So we'll just start with that. Already sprayed them with some WD-40 in hopes that this doesn't turn into an 8-hour ordeal. Nice. That's that one. And we can't get the impact on the top though, but I think this should work. All right. So it's just two 17 mil nuts, one on the bottom and one on the top. Our bushings are pretty shot too. So I was checking this against the hard body, the pickup truck parts, and the mounts are the same type of mount. It was just the length of the shock when it was extended and compressed that was a little bit different, but it wasn't anything that should cause any problems. It was literally like a 1/4 inch different when it was extended and like 1/2 inch when it was compressed or something like that. So nothing that would keep it from installing. But the front was way different. I think the frame is actually slightly different on the front. So the difference between the compressed and extended lengths in the front are like 2 or 3 inches off or something like that. So the front just wasn't gonna work, but the rear should. So at least we have the increased dampening, however you say it, in the rear. There we go. Like I said, these are electric, so they have like a wire harness to them. I can't see where the plug is. I imagine it can't be too complicated to get to, because I mean, the shocks have to be replaceable, but I can't see where the plug is. You can see the wire here. Seems like just on top here. It's not like we're gonna need any of this. Like, they don't even make replacements for the electronic suspension anymore, so we really don't need to save any of this. I should just cut it out, but there we go. And then same thing for the other side. So here we got the old crusty electric shocks versus the brand new KYB Monomax shocks. So you can see they add like 50 horsepower because they're red.
But what does that have to do with anything?
No, he's got a point.
Okay, now at this point we would be ready to put the shocks back on, but here's where I'm gonna bamboozle you guys by taking the springs out and cutting them, because we're actually gonna be lowering the Pathfinder. So hopefully this doesn't fall off of here. We got the jack stands on the frame rails in front, so we should be good. Let's see if that's enough room. Yeah. Okay, Okay, now we got both the springs out, and it looks like I had a little like support thing on here too. We're just gonna go ahead and yank this out also, because this is probably to help raise it a little bit, which is not what we want. So you just toss that. Now, kind of need to decide how much to cut. You want to try and cut in the same spot that the spring ends, because usually there's like perches on the vehicle that are meant to like receive the end of the shock. So like there'll be like a piece that meets up with where the spring is cut here to keep it from like spinning around and stuff. Like for example here, we would want to cut on this same plane. So like here or here, you don't want to cut here because then the spring is going to locate at the bottom here, and then the front portion isn't going to line up with anything. It depends on the vehicle though. Sometimes they don't even have anything to locate the end of the spring, and it is just sitting in there flat. Just use your judgment, and yeah, don't trust any random guys on YouTube telling you how to modify your suspension. This has been done for like decades though. I mean, anytime somebody needed to lower something that there's no suspension or lowering springs for, just get the springs out and chop them up. Just any angle grinder with the cutoff wheel should do. Let's go to shot. All right, so now since our springs are going to be shorter, we're going to have more suspension travel upwards, I guess. And we'll probably need to get rid of this bump stop. So I'm just going to toss it. All right, I thought that one was going to strip, but okay, now we can put our spring back in, which is going to be significantly easier now with all this room. And see, this is what I was talking about with the spring perches being notched to accept a particular spot for the spring to end. As you can see, it has like a little ledge here, and that's meant to hold that portion of the spring. Luckily on top, there isn't anything like that. You can't really see from here, but the top is just flat, so it wouldn't have mattered where we cut it. But I ended up cutting about a coil and a half, just because I cut the first coil down to that same section, and it didn't seem like it was gonna do anything. It was like maybe 3/4 of an inch, maybe an inch of material. So then I cut the next coil down, and that should give us at least a couple inches, maybe 3 or more, I don't know. We're gonna have to see. But now we can lift the axle back up and try to get our shocks back into place. All right, now we're ready for our shocks. And there's just little studs on the frame on top where that lines up, and then same thing here on the bottom. You just put the 17 mil back on. Oh man, these are definitely way stiffer. Not to drop the axle. Let's just bolt the top back on each side. And then we'll lower the axle again and bolt down the bottom. All right, now the best part of having nice suspension components is you get stickers. Oh my God! And slap these on. I'm thinking something like this. Yeah, now it looks professional. All right, now we can move on to the fronts, and hopefully this doesn't turn into a whole ordeal. They look simple. There's just a 17 mil bolt at the bottom, 14 mil nut at the top, and that's it. Looks like it might get complicated to thread it out of here, but this is the old one, so I don't care if we're marring it up. That's not too bad. Yeah. You know what? These weren't completely gone either. Like, it's not total garbage. extend slowly. Dude, that's crazy. This shock is like math. 33 years old? Is that right? Dude, 33 years old and it's not blown. That's amazing. But these are probably still better. Yeah. So like that. Came with an extra nut even. Whatever. Now to get it back in. That's the downside of this. These are upgraded shocks, so the damping is a little bit stiffer. These were either 10 or 15, I can't remember. But that makes it, on top of being a new shock, which would already be better than the old ones, it's stiffer than stock, which means I can't really compress it by hand. All right, now it's time to lower the front of our Pathfinder, and to do that, I think this is gonna be probably the easiest vehicle to change the ride height on, even more so than like coilovers, because this thing has these magical things called torsion rods. I still find these kind of weird because like the whole front of the vehicle is basically held up by this bar's resistance to being twisted. So it has splines at the front and the back. They're attached here to this mechanism, and this is basically fixed in place, and they're attached to the lower control arm at the front. And obviously the lower control arm moves up and down as the vehicle, you know, moves around. And that movement up and down transfers to this bar and tries to twist it. As the suspension goes up, it tries to twist the bar. And the strength of this bar is what keeps the front of the truck up. And it's crazy that it can take that kind of like load, because it's just a few splines in here being held in place and it holds up the whole truck. So that's kind of cool. And back here, the best part for us is that torsion bars usually have some kind of adjustment like we have here. And what this does is it basically allows you to like preload your, essentially what's your spring rate. The amount of twist on this bar is basically your spring rate. So by twisting this more, you're basically adding preload to it. That helps us because we can go ahead and loosen this. There's only a 19 mil nut at the top, and it attaches to this 19 mil bolt at the bottom. And by loosening this, you're basically untwisting the bar. So in the suspensions, with the suspension at full droop, there will be like no tension on the bar. All right, so that's basically full loose. And what that's gonna do is basically lower the front of the Pathfinder. I'm just gonna snug this up so it's not like rattling or anything. And then we put the lock nut on the top and then snug it down. You see it's still pretty much loose. So I'm basically hoping that this is gonna look good and be enough, because we can't really lower it any more than this. This is already fully loosened, so whatever ride height it's at, that's just where it's gonna be. I think from reading on the forums about like people like trying to lift these and stuff, I believe you can remove the bar from these brackets and like install it in a different orientation. So basically you're preloading it before you mess with this bolt at all. And that'll give you more tension, or basically a higher spring rate than you would normally if you were to just leave it alone. So there's other ways to do it if you really needed to, but I don't really want to mess with all that. So I'm just hoping that this is gonna look good. So now it's time to move on to our wheels and tires. All right, now it's time for the icing on the cake, and that's our wheels and tires. And I'm a little bummed about it because I would have loved to put some sort of Titan or Armada wheels on this, but the problem with that is that they changed the hub size on the newer vehicles from like, I think 2005 and forward. So Titan or Armada wheels won't physically fit on the older Pathfinders. People if you had a tool drive like the hard body pickup, you can kind of get away with it by using a lathe, kind of like ours, but even ours is actually too small for that. You can machine out the hub on Titan wheels to fit over the larger hubs on older vehicles like the hard body or Pathfinder if it was two-wheel drive. Unfortunately, ours is four-wheel drive, so it has these giant honking hubs at the front, and you wouldn't be able to machine that much out of a Titan wheel for it to fit. So I had to look for other options, and what I came up with was these. And these are actually off a Toyota. They're off a 2005, 6, 7-ish 4Runner V8. And the V8s came with 18s. And I wanted 18s, so that was basically our only option because the bolt pattern is correct and the hub diameter is bigger than we need. So these were basically the only wheels that were gonna fit. And to make them fit, the hub is actually too large, so it's 106 millimeter diameter for the Toyotas, but they actually make hub-centric adapters for those sizes. So this is an adapter for 106 mil down to 100 mil, which is what the Pathfinder is. And so these go in the back of your wheel here, like that, and now it'll fit directly on our hub. And you always want to use hub-centric rings whenever possible because the lugs are not meant to hold the weight of your vehicle, contrary to whatever people say or tell you. The weight of the vehicle is meant to be held by the hub. So don't get aftermarket wheels with no hub rings and just throw lug nuts on there and expect it to last a long time, because it will eventually break and your wheel may come flying off at some point and potentially hurt somebody. So get hub rings if you need them. They're like 20 bucks. So it's cheap insurance. Now this should fit right up. And then the next thing that we had to buy are special lug nuts. These Toyota wheels use a mag type lug nut, and that's a flat washer type of lug nut like this here. I mean, the regular lug nuts kind of fit, but you'll be chewing up the wheel like really bad. Like they'll just be gouging out the inside of the lug holes here. So you want to get the appropriate lug nuts for whatever wheels you have. And actually I had to look through for a few different kinds of these because the diameter in here is really particular. It's like 18 millimeter. And I found a couple sets that were like 22 mil, 20 mil, 19 mil, 16 mil, which would have been too loose in here. And these I finally found that were the exact 18 mil that we need. Unfortunately, they only came in a set of 20, which I was like, okay, cool, no problem. And then I remembered that these wheels are 6 lugs, so we're gonna be missing a lug nut regardless. But whatever, 5's enough. All right, now time to move on to the back and put our wheels on. Then we'll be done. All right, gotta admit, I had my doubts for a bit, but I think it came out pretty good. Check this out. And we're back. So that went great. The car handles like a newer toolbox now, at least. So that's cool. And our e-brake works now. See, we don't gotta crank it super hard now, and it keeps the truck from moving. And best of all, Kylo has 0 issues getting in and out. Right, bud? High five. Say bye. Thanks for joining us on this episode, and stay tuned till next time when we try to polish it up a bit. So see you guys next time, and always do your best.